It's easy to believe that in our modern world, there's nowhere left you can't reach. Planes can cross oceans in hours, satellites can map every corner of the Earth, and with enough money, you can get almost anywhere you want. But that's only almost. There are still places on this planet that remain almost completely inaccessible places so far away, so isolated, or so hostile that reaching them feels more like a mission to another world than a simple trip. Some of these places are inhabited, where a few hundred people live their entire lives surrounded by thousands of kilometers of ocean. Others are frozen mountains that have claimed more lives than have ever reached their summits. There are islands with no airports, deserts where no road has ever been built, and parts of the ocean so deep that only a handful of humans have ever seen them. And perhaps the most fascinating thing is that, in an age where technology can find you anywhere, there are still locations that don't want to be found places protected by law, belief, or geography itself. So, if you left right now, packed your bags, boarded a plane, and set out to visit the most difficult place in the world to reach, where would you end up? What would it take to get there? And why, even today, do parts of our planet remain beyond reach? This is the story of the hardest places on Earth to get to and the people, mountains, and mysteries that define the edge of our world. In the 21st century, it's easy to assume that there's nowhere left in the world that we can't reach. With the rise of air travel, satellites, and high-speed transportation, it feels as though every place on Earth is only a few clicks or a flight away. In a matter of hours, you can cross continents, oceans, and even climates. From the deserts of Africa to the skyscrapers of Asia, the modern traveler can go almost anywhere. But the key word is almost, because even today, in an age of GPS, jet engines, and instant communication, there are still places on this planet that remain extraordinarily hard to reach, regions so remote, so inaccessible, or so harsh that only a handful of people have ever set foot there. Some are far from civilization, others are hidden behind natural barriers that defy even the best technology. And some are legally off-limits altogether. A little over a century ago, reaching most parts of the world took weeks, sometimes months. In 1914, a map published in London showed how long it would take to reach different parts of the planet if you started your journey in Britain. According to that map, almost all of Europe could be reached in under 5 days by train or ship. But to travel to the United States would take 10 to 20 days. Australia, as many as 40, and certain areas of Africa and Asia could take several months. Today, those same journeys can be made in hours. A flight from London to New York takes under 8 hours. To Sydney, around 20. Modern travel has compressed the scale of the world, shrinking distances that once separated civilizations. Yet, for all that progress, there are still some places that technology has barely touched: islands, mountains, and frozen lands that remain stubbornly distant. Take Pitcairn Island, for example. This small patch of volcanic rock in the middle of the South Pacific is one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth. It is a British overseas territory and home to fewer than 50 people descendants of the famous mutineers from HMS Bounty. The island itself is tiny, only a few kilometers wide, surrounded by endless ocean in every direction. There's no airport, no runway, and no regular air service of any kind. The only way to reach Pitcairn is by ship, and even that is difficult. The supply vessel that connects the island to the outside world departs only a few times a year, usually from New Zealand, and the voyage can take several days. In between visits, the people who live there are completely self-sufficient, relying on solar power, local farming, and satellite communications for contact with the outside world. The government has even tried to attract new residents by offering free plots of land to anyone willing to move there. But few have taken up the offer. The reality of living on an island that remote, where supplies might not arrive for months, and where the sea often decides your fate, isn't for everyone. Still, Pitcairn isn't even close to being the most difficult place on Earth to reach. For that, you have to travel even farther to places where the nearest settlement isn't hundreds, but thousands of kilometers away, and where the environment itself fights back against any attempt to stay. One of those places is the Kerguelen Islands, sometimes called the Desolation Islands. Located in the remote southern Indian Ocean, this French-controlled archipelago lies roughly 300 kilometers from Madagascar and more than 4,000 from Australia. There are no permanent civilians there, only a rotating crew of about 50 to 100 scientists and engineers stationed at the main base, Portaux-Français. The islands are wild, windswept, and almost always cold. There are no trees, just endless rocky hills and glaciers. Reaching the Kerguelen Islands requires patience and time. The only connection is by ship from Reunion Island, near Madagascar, and the journey takes nearly a week. The supply vessel makes the trip only about 4 times a year, bringing food, equipment, and personnel. There are no flights, no tourist boats, and no emergency evacuations unless another ship happens to be nearby. Once you arrive, you're on your own until the next scheduled visit. It's hard to imagine remoteness on that scale in the modern world. Even most uninhabited islands today are reachable by satellite-guided ship or small plane. But the Kerguelen Islands are different because of their distance and their environment. They are often battered by hurricane-force winds and rough seas, earning their nickname the Desolation Islands. They have no shelter, no natural harbor large enough for big ships, and few places where landing is even possible. Those who go there, usually for research, understand that it's not just remote, it's isolation in its purest form. Of course, not every difficult place to reach is an island. Some of the hardest locations to access on Earth are high above sea level, locked in snow and ice. Mountains like K2, Annapurna, and Mount Sidley challenge even the most experienced climbers. Mount Sidley, for instance, is Antarctica's highest volcano. It sits in one of the coldest, most desolate regions of the continent Marie Byrd, land a part of Antarctica so remote that no country even claims it. There are no airstrips nearby, no research bases, and no permanent camps. The mountain was discovered in 1934, but it wasn't climbed until 1990. Since then, only a handful of expeditions have ever reached its summit. To get there, you would have to fly to Antarctica, no small feat, as there are no commercial flights, and then arrange for private transport from a research base like MC Murdo or Union Glacier. From there, it's a journey by small aircraft to the interior, across one of the emptiest landscapes on Earth, followed by a climb through extreme cold and unpredictable weather. Very few people have done it, and even fewer ever will. Climbing Mount Sidley is a reminder that there are still places on Earth that might as well be on another planet. Antarctica, with its ice-covered terrain and sub-zero temperatures, remains one of the most inaccessible regions humans can visit. Even with modern aircraft, the logistics of reaching its interior are incredibly complex. It's a place where the smallest mistake can mean disaster. That's part of what makes it so fascinating and so rarely seen. For most people, though, the idea of difficult to reach doesn't mean risking frostbite or climbing volcanoes. It means traveling to a place so far away that simply getting there feels like an expedition. Think about it this way. In 1914, traveling from London to New Zealand could take months by ship. Today, it's just a 24-hour journey by air. But reaching certain islands in the Pacific or the southern Indian Ocean, or even remote parts of the Arctic, can still take as long as that 1914 journey did. Not because we lack the technology, but because there's simply no infrastructure there. No runways, no ports, no roads, just open space. And then there are the mountains that not only test your physical endurance, but your odds of survival. Mount Everest may be the highest point on Earth and an incredible challenge, but it is not the most dangerous. With around 4,000 successful ascents in history, Everest has become almost familiar. K2, the world's second highest mountain, is far deadlier. Standing at 611 meters, it is steep, unpredictable, and extremely difficult to climb. Only around 300 people have ever made it to the top, while more than 70 have died trying, a fatality rate of roughly 1 in 5. The nickname, the Savage Mountain, is well earned. Even experienced climbers who have conquered Everest often fail to reach K2 summit. Harsh winds, avalanches, and near-vertical slopes make it one of the toughest physical challenges known to man. Even more dangerous is Annapurna in Nepal, the 10th highest mountain in the world. At 8,091 meters, it is shorter than both Everest and K2, but statistically far deadlier. Roughly 1 in 4 climbers who attempt it never return. The mountain's unstable snowpack and unpredictable weather make it lethal, even for the best mountaineers. These peaks are not just difficult to reach, they are actively trying to kill you. And then there are places that are not just physically challenging, but legally impossible to access. In Bhutan, the mountain Gangkhar Puensum stands at 7,570 meters and holds the title of the tallest unclimbed mountain on Earth. It's not that no one has tried, it's that no one is allowed to. The Bhutanese government banned mountain climbing above 6,000 meters in the 1990s out of respect for local spiritual beliefs, and Gangkhar Puensum remains permanently off-limits. So even though climbers have reached higher peaks elsewhere, this summit remains untouched, unseen by human footprints. It's one of the last truly unreachable places left on the planet, not because of distance or danger, but because of choice. All of these examples show that difficult to reach doesn't have just one definition. For some places, it means thousands of kilometers of ocean in every direction. For others, it means mountains that test the limits of human endurance. And for a few, it means being closed off, intentionally preserved from human interference. Together, they remind us that even in an age of satellites and smartphones, our planet still holds mysteries that can't be reached with a plane ticket. Some corners of the Earth remain defiantly inaccessible, and perhaps that's a good thing, because in a world where almost everything has become easy to reach, these rare places remind us how vast and untamed our planet still is. When we talk about the most inaccessible places on Earth, we often imagine uninhabited islands or deadly mountains. But remarkably, there are a few locations where people actually live permanently in conditions so remote that getting there feels like traveling to another planet. These are not tourist destinations or survival experiments. They are real communities, complete with schools, homes, and small governments functioning hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away from the nearest major city. To reach them requires days of travel, multiple modes of transportation, and in many cases, a good amount of luck with the weather. One of the most extreme examples is Tristan da Cunha, a volcanic island sitting almost exactly halfway between South America and Africa. It is officially the most isolated inhabited place on Earth. The island is a British overseas territory, but it lies more than 400 kilometers from its nearest neighbor, the island of St. Helena, and nearly 800 kilometers from Cape Town, South Africa. Fewer than 250 people live there, all concentrated in a single village called Edinburgh of the Seven Seas. There is no airport, no harbor suitable for large ships, and no regular connection to the outside world. The only way to reach the island is by boat on a long, unpredictable journey from Cape Town that happens only about 8 or 9 times a year. Once you set sail, it's a 7-day trip across rough South Atlantic waters. Storms can delay or cancel departures for weeks. When you finally arrive, there's no pier for docking passengers, and supplies are ferried ashore by smaller boats. The isolation is complete. Yet the islanders live relatively comfortably. They have a school, a small hospital, a post office, and even an internet connection, though it's slow and limited. Most of the economy revolves around fishing, particularly the Tristan rock lobster, a delicacy exported around the world. Life here is quiet, orderly, and cooperative. Doors are left unlocked, cars sit with keys in the ignition, and everyone knows everyone else. The sense of safety and community is absolute. But the price is isolation. Mail and medical supplies arrive only when the supply ship does, and any emergency requiring evacuation can take weeks to handle. Still, the people of Tristan da Cunha choose to stay. For them, the distance from the world is not a problem, it's part of the identity that defines who they are. Tristan may be the most famous example, but it is far from the only one. Thousands of kilometers to the north, deep in the Arctic, lies another contender. Alert, Canada, the northernmost permanently inhabited settlement on Earth. Located just 817 kilometers from the North Pole, Alert sits on the edge of the Arctic Ocean in a landscape of ice and rock. There are no trees, no sunlight for several months each winter, and temperatures regularly drop below -40 degrees Celsius. The community exists primarily to support a military and research base operated by the Canadian Armed Forces. Fewer than 70 people live there year-round, rotating in and out every few months. Supplies are flown in from southern Canada on specialized aircraft equipped for polar landings. There are no roads leading in or out. In fact, there are no roads for hundreds of kilometers in any direction. For much of the year, the base is surrounded by darkness and howling winds. Yet, it is critical for monitoring global weather patterns, atmospheric changes, and Arctic communication. Living in Alert requires an entirely different rhythm of life, where daylight disappears for half the year and isolation is measured not in miles, but in months. If we move to the opposite extreme, in the frozen south, we find McMurdo Station, the largest human outpost in Antarctica. Located on Ross Island, McMurdo is technically accessible by air or sea, but only for part of the year. During the Antarctic winter, which lasts from April to October, the continent is completely cut off by darkness and ice. No planes land and no ships approach. The population drops from around 1,000 in summer to barely 200 in winter. Temperatures can plunge below -60 degrees Celsius. The people who stay behind, scientists, engineers, and support staff, live in one of the most isolated environments humans have ever experienced. Outside communication depends on satellite links. Resupply missions are impossible for months at a time. McMurdo is a reminder that remoteness doesn't always depend on distance. Sometimes it's about the barriers nature itself imposes. Between these extremes of ice and ocean, there are other places where remoteness comes in different forms. The Kerguelen Islands, mentioned earlier, are one such example, a cluster of volcanic peaks and fjords in the middle of the southern Indian Ocean. Like Tristan, they have no airport and no permanent residents outside of a few dozen French researchers stationed at Portaux-Francaise. The nearest large settlement, Reunion Island, is nearly 3,000 kilometers away. The supply ship arrives only 4 times a year. When it departs, the island is left completely alone. The Kerguelen Islands are often battered by fierce winds that can reach hurricane strength, and rain falls on more than 300 days a year. The environment is harsh enough that no crops grow naturally. Everything from fuel to food has to be imported. Yet for scientists studying climate change, glaciers, and seabird colonies, the Kerguelen Islands are invaluable. Their remoteness makes them one of the few places left on Earth where nature remains almost entirely untouched. Even within large nations, there are pockets of isolation so severe they might as well be islands. In the central Sahara Desert, for example, there are small communities that can only be reached by long convoys across hundreds of kilometers of sand. Towns like Faya Largeau in northern Chad or Tamanrasset in southern Algeria are connected to the rest of the world by a single road or airstrip, often swallowed by the desert itself. Supplies come irregularly, and communication is sparse. During sandstorms, visibility drops to 0 and all travel stops. Life in these places depends on water, endurance, and the knowledge of the terrain passed down through generations. In a world of constant connectivity, the desert still defends its isolation fiercely. Similarly, deep within the Amazon rainforest, entire communities remain cut off from modern infrastructure. While some are protected indigenous territories, others are small settlements that depend on rivers for transportation. To reach them, you travel by boat for days or even weeks, navigating dense vegetation and winding waterways. The rainforest's sheer scale makes it one of the most inaccessible regions on the planet. In fact, there are still uncontacted tribes in parts of the Amazon who have never interacted with the outside world, living proof that even now, in the 21st century, not all of humanity has been reached by globalization. What unites all these locations, from the icy Arctic to the humid Amazon, is not just their distance, but the way isolation shapes life. In Tristan da Cunha, Community is everything. In Alert, endurance and routine replace convenience. In Map.voyage, cooperation is survival. Each of these places forces people to depend on one another in ways that modern city life rarely requires. In cities, millions live side by side, but rarely know their neighbors. In these remote settlements, every person matters. A mechanic, a teacher, or a doctor isn't just another professional, they're a lifeline. Even with these examples, there are places still harder to reach, places where no one lives, and where even reaching the coastline is a challenge. Bouvet Island, for instance, is an uninhabited Norwegian territory in the South Atlantic, located roughly 700 kilometers from the nearest land in Antarctica. It's often described as the most remote island in the world. Covered in ice and surrounded by cliffs up to 500 meters high, it offers no safe landing spot. The weather is almost always violent, and the surrounding seas are some of the roughest on Earth. Reaching Bouvet requires a ship strong enough to handle Antarctic conditions and the ability to launch small boats through unpredictable waves. Very few expeditions have ever managed to set foot there. For most of history, Bouvet existed only as a name on a map, a reminder that some parts of the world remain beyond easy reach even in the age of satellites. Each of these examples helps us understand something simple but profound. The Earth may be mapped, but it's not conquered. Technology has given us airplanes, ships, and global positioning, but distance, weather, and terrain still win sometimes. Even in 2025, you can't simply go anywhere you want on demand. Some places remain so far, so hostile, or so delicate that they exist outside the reach of everyday travel. For scientists, these locations are invaluable. For adventurers, they are irresistible. And for the rest of us, they serve as a reminder that no matter how advanced our world becomes, the planet still holds secrets that resist convenience. In the end, what defines the most difficult place to get to is not a single coordinate on a map. It's a combination of factors: geography, politics, danger, and endurance. Some of these places are covered in ice, others scorched by desert heat, some are isolated by ocean, others by altitude.
But all of them challenge the idea that the world is small.
They remind us that we still live on a planet vast enough to contain wilderness and mystery. And as we continue to explore, study, and map every corner, these remaining pockets of remoteness stand as the final frontiers of human reach, places where nature, geography, and circumstance still decide who gets to enter. Even with planes that cross oceans in hours and satellites that photograph every corner of the planet, there are still places on Earth that remain largely untouched, locations so distant, dangerous, or restricted that reaching them is nearly impossible. These are the final frontiers of accessibility, where geography, law, and nature combine to create true isolation. Some are towering peaks no one has ever stood on. Others are vast stretches of land where human footprints have never been recorded. And a few are beneath the surface of the ocean itself, hidden from view and shielded by crushing pressure. Mountains have always represented humanity's struggle against nature's limits. The higher we climb, the thinner the air, the colder the temperature, and the greater the risk. Mount Everest is the most famous example, and while its summit stands as the highest point on Earth, it is no longer the most difficult place to reach. More than 4,000 climbers have reached the top, supported by modern equipment, oxygen tanks, and commercial expeditions. But some peaks remain far more elusive. The most dangerous of these is Annapurna I in Nepal. Standing at 8,091 meters, it has a death rate of around 1 in 4, the highest of any mountain over 8,000 meters. Unstable ice walls, sudden avalanches, and unpredictable weather make every attempt a gamble. Even for experienced climbers, reaching the summit of Annapurna is a life-or-death proposition. Then there's K2, the second highest mountain on Earth, located on the border of Pakistan and China. At 8,611 meters, it is slightly shorter than Everest, but far deadlier. Only about 300 people have ever reached the top, compared to the thousands who have summited Everest. The nickname, the Savage Mountain, perfectly describes it. The steep slopes, high winds, and constant danger of falling ice make it one of the most technically demanding climbs on the planet. In winter, no one managed to reach its peak until 2021, an achievement that took decades of attempts. For many climbers, surviving K2 is considered a greater accomplishment than summiting Everest itself. But even these peaks have been conquered. There are mountains that no one has ever climbed, not because they are too hard, but because they are off-limits. One of these is Gangkhar Puensum, located on the border between Bhutan and Tibet. At 570 meters, it is the tallest unclimbed mountain on Earth. Climbers attempted to reach its summit in the 1980s, but poor mapping and extreme conditions made it nearly impossible. In the 1990s, Bhutan's government banned climbing on all peaks above 6,000 meters out of respect for local spiritual beliefs that consider mountains sacred. That ban remains in place today, effectively freezing Gangkhar Puensum in time. As a result, no one has ever stood on its summit, and likely no one will for many decades to come. In a world where nearly everything can be reached, this mountain is a deliberate exception, a place humanity has chosen not to touch. There are also unclimbed peaks that are not protected by law but remain untouched simply because of their sheer isolation. Muchu Shi in northern Pakistan, for example, is the highest unclimbed mountain in the world that climbers are legally allowed to attempt. It stands at 453 meters and is part of the Karakoram Range, one of the most rugged mountain systems on Earth. Only 2 expeditions have ever tried to climb it, both of which failed. The combination of treacherous terrain, unstable weather, and lack of established routes makes it nearly impossible to approach safely. For mountaineers seeking the ultimate challenge, Muchu Shirese will last great test, a summit that remains beyond reach. Not because it's forbidden, but because it simply refuses to be conquered. Still, even the most remote mountain can be seen, mapped, and theoretically climbed. Some parts of the world, however, are so geographically hostile that exploration remains impractical. Deep within the Amazon rainforest, for instance, there are regions that have never been fully surveyed. The thick canopy prevents aerial mapping, while the dense vegetation and river networks make overland travel excruciatingly slow. There are still tribes living in these regions who have never had contact with the outside world, protected by international law to ensure their isolation. The forest itself spans more than 5 million square kilometers, making it larger than the entire European Union. Even with satellites and modern drones, there are valleys and mountains in the Amazon that remain virtually unknown. In many ways, it's still a living mystery, one of the few places where Earth keeps its secrets hidden under the trees. Farther north, in the frozen Arctic, lies another vast region that has resisted full exploration, Greenland's interior. Most of the island is covered by an ice sheet more than 3 kilometers thick. Beneath that ice lies a landscape of mountains, valleys, and ancient riverbeds that no human has ever seen directly. Scientists have used radar to map parts of it, revealing what appears to be one of the world's largest canyon systems buried under the ice. But no one has been there, and no one likely will be until the ice retreats, if it ever does. The sheer scale of Greenland's ice cap, combined with its isolation, makes it one of the last unexplored regions on the planet. And then there's Antarctica, the final continent. Even now, more than a century after the first expeditions reached its coasts, enormous sections of it remain untouched. The interior of East Antarctica is home to some of the coldest temperatures ever recorded, dipping below -90 degrees Celsius. There are entire mountain ranges, such as the Gamburtsev Mountains, buried beneath the ice, unseen since they formed hundreds of millions of years ago. Scientists estimate that less than 1% of Antarctica's landmass has ever been visited by humans. Reaching its interior requires specialized aircraft, months of preparation, and a tolerance for conditions that push the limits of survival. It is a place where machinery freezes, GPS signals weaken, and even breathing becomes painful. But the most inaccessible places on Earth aren't only found above the surface. Some of them are far below it. The deep ocean remains one of the least explored environments on the planet. More people have walked on the moon than have visited the deepest part of the ocean, the Challenger Deep, located in the Mariana Trench in the western Pacific. It lies nearly 11 kilometers below the surface, under crushing pressure more than 1,000 times greater than at sea level. The first crewed descent was made in 1960 by Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh in the bathyscaphe Triste. Since then, only a handful of missions have returned. The challenges are immense: total darkness, freezing temperatures, and a pressure so extreme that a tiny mechanical failure could destroy any vessel instantly. Yet, in this alien environment, life persists: strange, luminous creatures adapted to a world of darkness. The ocean floor remains one of Earth's greatest mysteries, still largely unmapped and unexplored. When we look at all of these places, the unclimbed peaks, the forbidden regions, the buried landscapes, and the ocean depths, a pattern begins to emerge. Humanity has reached nearly everywhere that can be reached easily. What's left are the extremes, places defined by distance, danger, or deliberate protection. And in some cases, it's not nature that keeps us out, but our own decisions. International treaties protect vast parts of Antarctica and the high seas from exploitation. Certain islands, like North Sentinel Island in the Indian Ocean, are closed off entirely to protect the indigenous people living there from outside contact. In a way, these restrictions are a reminder that not every place needs to be visited or conquered. Some are better left alone. Technology has undoubtedly made the world smaller. A century ago, traveling from London to New York took a week by ship. Now it takes less than 8 hours by plane. Satellites can map terrain that humans have never seen, and remote sensing can detect features buried kilometers underground. But despite all this progress, there are still corners of Earth where human presence is fleeting or non-existent. The combination of extreme environments, distance, and preservation laws ensures that true isolation still exists. In fact, it may be more valuable now than ever before. These remote and inaccessible places serve as natural laboratories, time capsules that preserve ecosystems, geological formations, and species untouched by human activity. They remind us that for all our progress, we are still a small part of a much larger world. For explorers, they represent the final challenge. For scientists, they are windows into the unknown. And for everyone else, they are symbols of something rare: mystery. In a world where almost everything can be found with a search engine or mapped with a satellite, mystery is becoming a scarce resource. The idea that there are still places no one has seen, that there are still summits unclimbed, and valleys unnamed gives our planet a sense of wonder that technology alone can't replace. The most difficult places to get to in the world aren't just hard because of distance or danger. They're hard because they challenge the limits of what humans can endure, both physically and mentally. They exist at the intersection of geography, willpower, and respect, where ambition meets the reality of nature's scale. Some may never be reached, others may eventually yield to exploration, but all of them remind us that complete accessibility is an illusion. The Earth is vast, wild, and still beyond our total control. So, while the world may seem small on a map, it remains immense when measured by experience. There will always be places too far, too deep, too high, or too sacred to reach. And maybe that's exactly as it should be, because it's in those unreachable places on the peaks no one has stood upon, beneath the oceans no light has touched, and in the frozen lands no one has crossed, that the true scale of our planet still survives.